Yeah, right, nice to meet you.
Yeah, I have an envelope for you. Is that all right, or are you just one on one side?
He asked me to go up there and
Yeah, well, you go wherever you want to get your best shot. You know. It's you there now.
Thanks, Ryan.
No, I can see him.
Yeah.
Lovely day, isn't it? Gorgeous.
Yeah. Makes the occasion a little bit easier to take, doesn't it? Yeah.
You can recognize some songs on the band.
Joel.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Say that afterwards.
Good afternoon, everybody. We'd like you to take your seats as quickly as possible. If you get a drink from the centre over here, the non-alcoholic is on the left and the other stuff is on the right. And just take your seats. There are seats back here in the coach house, and there are seats on the patio in the shade up there. Yeah. There's sun cream on one of the tables if anybody needs sun cream.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for coming down today to celebrate the life of such an amazing man. A man who I was just really proud to just call my grandfather, and I couldn't have asked for a better man to watch over me my whole life. So if anyone knew Richard, you'll know that he always loved a glass of red wine with his dinner. And he even went as far to France several times with his friend Eugene to collect obscene amounts of bottles of wine to bring them home and have them for the year then. So if you all don't mind in joining me raising our glasses for such an amazing man, and we'll bottoms up.
You're all very welcome here today to join with us in remembering and celebrating the wonderful life of Richard. We want to share stories of his life and we hope during refreshments later that you share your stories too. We respectfully ask that you not approach Ruth today, as it's too overwhelming for her. Richard left us the gift of his book of Charlestown and his life, which he wrote for his grandchildren, and it has been really lovely reading over it in recent days. He had plenty of time to make decisions regarding his funeral, and this poem sums up his feelings perfectly. Let me go. When I come to the end of the road and the sun has set for me, I want no rights in a gloom-filled room. Why cry for a soul set free? Richard was born prematurely on the 29th of August 1935, only months after his older 2.5-year-old brother John had died. Mimi, his aunt, returned home from working in Bristol to help Margaret look after Richard. He had 3 younger brothers, Buddy, Michael and Peter. Richard was very close to his mother all his life, and her dedication to self-sufficiency gave him his love for making all the jams, jellies, chutneys, meatloaf and sloe gin. They used to go down to Ballyhealy by pony and trap during the summers to a little wooden hut in Mrs. Pierce's field, and it sounds lovely, his account of those times. He started school at 8 or 9, so late because of the emergency after the war, and he cycled some days down to a small private school in Rathaspic run by Mrs. Mons, and when he was 10 he was sent to the Tate School in Wexford as a boarder, as petrol for daily transport was scarce. When Mimi came to visit after a month, she removed him in protest at the primitive conditions. He finished that school year in a small school run by Mrs. O'Connor in Lightwater. At 11 he was sent to a vocal school in Blackrock, County Dublin, where he met his great friend Peter Boardman. He did a 6-month apprenticeship in an accountant's office in Dame Street, Dublin, and then worked for the Irish Dunlop Company in Abbey Street for a year. At 21 he went to London to join Buddy and got a job with him on the ship the Dominion Monarch, where he did 3 trips from London to New Zealand and Australia. The ship had a crew of 500 and carried 500 passengers. He met Ruth, the love of his life, in the early 1950s. She was friends with Helen, Peter Boardman's sister, who later married Buddy. Richard left his life at sea and came home to stay aged 22. He used to visit Ruth in Dublin on a scooter lent to him by Mimi, and he and Ruth would regularly go dancing. Ruth's father encouraged him to farm, and he started sowing potatoes and then expanded to include other crops. He started on the reconstruction of the house in Newtown in 1961, and during that time they lived in Charlestown for 6 months. He bought an in-calf cow with money Ruth had given him and soon built that herd to 10. They married on the 17th of November 1960 in Clontarf, and in 1964 they bought Fuddletown, where we are today. When they were doing drainage work in the Avenue Gate field, they found bones which were of an ancient Irish deer, and it's now in the Natural History Museum in Dublin. There was great excitement at that time, with busloads of archaeologists going down to see it. In 1967, Richard was on the Farmers' March to Dublin for negotiating rights for farmers and was very active in this organisation. In 1985, he went to Venice to sail back a friend's boat, joined by various friends for parts of the journey, including Heather and Keith. In 1989-90, he built a big shed in Charlestown to expand the herd of cattle. He had accomplished a lot in farming at that point and took advantage of an early retirement scheme in 1994 to indulge his passion for all sorts of other projects that lots of us know about. Not only had he an incredibly creative and inventive mind, but he had the perseverance, determination, skill and problem-solving ability to see his ideas through to completion. He had quite a casual relationship with health and safety, as witnessed by us and told in so many stories over the past few days. Boats have always been deep in Richard's DNA, and he shared that love with his father Cecil. For years he went to the Shannon with his dad on his boat Calloo. And then he bought the barge Knocknagow, owned previously by Roadstone. And Keith will talk a bit more about this later on. But that used to lift gravel out of the Slaney. He fitted a lorry engine to it and cut 6 feet out of it so it would fit through the locks. He sailed it as far as Crosshaven, which involved a lifeboat rescue when he got tangled in salmon nets around Helvig. He also charted a navigational channel up the Slaney from Ferrycarrig to Enniscorthy in 1987, and this was published in a book later. He built a jetty out in Ferrycarrig, which many of us will remember, and there's some great stories about that. But he was ordered to remove it by Wexford County Council at a later point. Our friend Brian, who was in his later day sailor boat about 20 years ago, while considering options and possibilities for improving it, suggested that maybe he could cut off the back and replace it. No sooner had Brian finished the sentence, but Richard started up the angle grinder and cut the back of it off, leaving Brian in shock. He had never witnessed impulsivity like that. Richard was a doer, a real action man, and not one for procrastination. He loved working for the Light Opera, putting together scenery and props, often discarded from Wexford Opera Festival, and he made great friends there. He used to drive a decorated trailer around Wexford door to door at Christmas with the Light Opera members, singing carols to raise money for charity. All the oak trees around here that you've passed on the way in were from acorns that he and Ruth collected and grew. I brought card bootfuls of them to Kilmore School as well and gave them to the pupils. And nearly all of our houses have those trees around, so it's lovely to have that legacy. Only 5 or 6 years ago, he got 1,200 trees and got the family together to plant them near his house. It was a special day and we had great fun when the auger on the back of his little tractor had fallen off and he had driven the whole length of the field, never once looking back to check. No holes had been dug, so we all had to get even busier that day. In 2008, he put up a wind turbine, and when we got a new wind turbine last year, the guy erecting it had known Richard and had changed their method of working, of raising them based on advice Richard had given him. In 2009, he installed a rainwater harvesting system and dug the hole big enough to create a wine cellar, which then necessitated, as Jeff said, regular trips to France with his best friend Eugene to keep it stocked for his daily lunchtime tipple. Following a conversation with his friend Victor from Moldova, he built a smokehouse and smoked pigs, fish, etc. in it. He surprised me one night, arriving up here with no prior warning, with 100 smoked pollock on a big tray, causing panic. About 30 years ago, he made a big industrial-sized barbecue to bring around to the houses for parties, and on its first outing, the tyres melted, so it had to go back to his workshop for a rethink and a refit. In 2016, he made a transportable clay pizza oven for parties, which we called Apollo 17. Everything he made was on an industrial scale. His workshop was a place of immense creativity. He travelled far and wide doing a pig on a spit, which he had made using a windscreen wiper motor for turning it. He loved those days. When Catherine casually mentioned that she might someday like to live in Springy Meadows and renovate the house there, he arrived there the following morning, tooled up and kitted out for the job, another of his magnificent achievements. People have mentioned over the past few days his visits to their houses with his log splitter that he made, which was originally driven by the Nuffield tractor and then had its own engine in a later adaptation. He spent a few years obsessed with the huge polytunnel he put up in Rathmacnee, which had a gravity-fed watering system which he had designed. Industrial amounts of produce in those were grown there for a few years. We just couldn't keep up. In 2020, he and Ruth came to New York with our family to see Hannah playing in Carnegie Hall. Although their mobility was beginning to create struggles for them at that point, they were amazing and wanted to do everything on the itinerary every day. Getting his cochlear implant about 10 years ago allowed him to reconnect and join in conversations, which he hadn't been able to do for a long time, but sometimes needed a bit of prompting to do that. Early last Thursday morning, when Louise, the palliative care nurse, called us, she told us his death was very close. By the end of her shift, 6 hours later, he was still holding on, and she said he has a very strong heart. We knew that strong heart, that generous, warm, open, giving heart. And although it was hard to say goodbye, we were glad his struggle and suffering was over. Louise took as much care of the family that night as she did of Richard, and for that we thank her. I really want to pay tribute to Catherine, who was there with Richard and Ruth more than anyone else, looking after their every need and doing it with endless positivity and optimism, recording all the funny interactions on the occasions when Richard would revisit his witty sense of humour that dementia had tried to take from him. Catherine was the glue that held the whole show together and the oil that kept it all running smoothly. She gathered a team of the most wonderful carers who brought such joy and good humour and excellent care to a very difficult situation and allowed Richard to live and die at home, surrounded by all his bits and his beloved cat who sat on his bed even on the night that he was dying. We're very moved that so many of you have turned up here today and to be with us at this time and to honour his life and everything that he achieved in it. Thank you very much.
So Yvonne has started the tears and I'm going to continue them. There's going to be a lot of tears from us all because we wouldn't be Richard's family if we didn't. He couldn't give a speech without crying. So firstly, I read in a book, I've been keeping notes of what Dad had said over the last few years. I just read it this morning. He had a stroke last October on the 14th, and the day after I was in with him, and he had an oxygen mask on his face and he could barely talk. And I just said to him, "Dad, are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah, are you okay?" And I was just so blown away that he could be thinking about me in his situation. He also had a cracking sense of humour in the hospital, because a month after the stroke he ended up back there again, and 3 doctors waltzed into the room when he was in bed and said to him, "How are you feeling, Richard?" And he said, "Well, I'd like a glass of wine." And they were really perplexed looking, and I looked around at me and he started laughing behind them because I was just so happy to see him like that. And then he said, "Do you remember what happened yesterday?" "I got married," he said, which continued me laughing, and the doctors didn't know what to do, really. They didn't know what was going on with them. So it was a fabulous time and a very sad time at the same time. Through it all, through everything that Dad went through for the last 4 years, he never lost his sense of humour. But there's one major thing I learned from him over the years, and it's become clearer lately, is that he was a man that just accepted everything and accepted everybody, and he accepted everything that life brought him through these last few years as well. Through disappointment, he just got on with it and said, "Okay, we'll fix it, or we'll do our best to fix it. Whatever we can fix, we will." So that's all I'm going to say about Dad. Through the last 3 years, we've had lots of carers helping out. Mostly we've had public carers and we've had private carers. So we've had, from CarePlan, we've had Gijo and Joe and Wendy and Martin, which they've just been fabulous, and thank you so much. And Fred as well. And then from Woodbrook, we've had Eva and Helen, and they've been fabulous all the way along. We also had the Alzheimer's Society, which was Sharon and Eilish, and Eilish had been with us for 3 years. She's retired now, so thank you, Eilish. We also had, what was the other company? Bluebird. We had Jolene and Charlene from Bluebird, and thank you very much. And then we get to the private carers who've been with Dad for the last 3 years, and they have made it just possible to have Dad at home. And we'd like to ask Jenny and Siobhan and Leanne just to come up for a little presentation of our thanks to you. where it all goes wrong. The flowers forgot to come out. This song that's playing in the background, I picked it because every time it came up on my Spotify, I thought of Dad, and I kept crying every time, so I thought it was appropriate for today. I was thinking of Lucinda, and Michaela. I just want to say that since I've seen how important care is for vulnerable people in the state that Dad was in, it just feels to me like one of the most important professions of all. And we're so grateful because they're up. Jenny and everyone brought their special things to the house, and it was a lot of fun. Leanne and Jenny and Siobhan were always just pulling jokes out of Dad, full time, pulling them out. And I want a special thanks to Michaela, because it's been such a hard time, and being able to talk to her, she's been like a counsellor as well as a carer for me. I've been ringing her non-stop, asking for help and crying and everything, and she's just been there all the time. So thank you so much, and thank you for being here.
I've got a few words of my own and then some borrowed words thereafter. As I crossed the leagues through the night, coming from Wales back to here, I saw a crescent moon setting. Ruddy and orange, it sank beneath a cloud, and it almost instantly became his face. Turning away west towards home, beckoning, guiding, and keeping safe the way across the seas. Many things about Richard were incredible, as in beyond belief. But the man himself was very credible indeed. He could believe things into existence like few other people can. He could look at a room and with a few quick measurements tell you exactly where and how you'd fit both a bed and a desk in the same space. He could look at a hulk of a barge and see the steps to bringing her back, putting her right and setting her back on the water, laid out like stones on a garden path. He could will into existence, with the application of a little oxyacetylene, a barbecue from scrap metal and a cattle trough. And he could do the same with people, though with less welding. He brought together talented and dedicated people from all over the southeast to form the Sinfonia and put in the hard work to keep it going for decades. And we can all take our cue from him to keep being incredible and credible in our own ways. I am standing upon the seashore, a ship at my side spreads her white sails to the moving breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength. I stand and watch her until, at length, she hangs like a speck of white cloud, just where the sea and sky come to mingle with each other. Then someone says at my side, "There, she is gone." Gone where? Gone from my sight. That is all. She is just as large in mast, hull and spar as she was when she left my side. And she is just as able to bear a load of living freight to her destined port. Her diminished size is not in her, is in me. And just at the moment when someone says, "There, she is gone," there are other eyes watching her coming, and there are other voices ready to take up the glad shout, "Here she comes." And that is dying.
I spent many years as a child following that around. That was actually my education. I sat up in the tractor with him during sowing and making hay and everything else. And one time, I'm told, when I was about 4, I fell asleep across his knees in the tractor. That tractor was parked over there. Imagine that. So, kind of everything that I know how to do or can do, I kind of picked it up from him. There was a few things got in the way sometimes, like school and stuff like that. But mostly my education was completed by Dad. I remember one time we were going down the road. I suppose I was probably 8, and we were going down the road down back down to the shortest end from here. And I was on a little blue bicycle, and Dad was on I think it was an NSU moped. And he put his hand on my back so we could go faster. And he pushed me along, and I'd say he probably got a bit over enthusiastic and pushed me a bit faster, because I couldn't get a tire on the bike first. I ended up walking home. But he was always one for giving you a hand like that. He'd never let you struggle. So, in going around with Dad, I was also going around with Bud, so Dad and Bud were kind of inseparable for so many years. And so many memories of sitting in the van between Dad and Bud, coming up here to see cattle, and Bud would have to then go over to Slida to get some cigaretto, or those little cigars in a can he used to get. He had to go and get them from himself in heaven, so we call up to Jimmy's for milk. So those are strong memories from growing up with Dad. We spent many times going up the rivers with Grandpa on Calloo. I remember one time he made a camper van to go on the back of the boat so I can transport or pick up. And we stayed up there. We might have only used it once because Mom wasn't a great camper. But I remember being up there with him one time in maybe Greg Manana or somewhere, and I was playing with some other kid on the shore of the river, and I was standing up on a park bench, and the other kid was kicking the other kid or something, and he pulled my leg, and I fell down, and Dad said, "I knew that was going to end that way." And then he came over to me and realised I was lying in a pool of blood. I'd split the back of my head open. So he picked me up and carried me off to the local doctor, who put stitches in, and that was grand. We carried on the holiday. I remember on the back of that tractor sowing corn and remember standing on the back of the corn sower, because he needs to know when it was running out, so I had to stand up on the back, and I was the marker for, okay, you need to stop now and put more seed in. So he was also Yvonne mentioned the barge, and Dad got the engine out of a BMC truck that I remember I was driving across the field while Dad and Bud and probably Shannon maybe were putting bales on the back, and I remember having to stop the truck whenever they shouted stop, and I'd have to put both hands in the steering wheel and both feet in the clutch pedal, push it down to get it out of gear so that I could stop them. So it's kind of a bit difficult to know how we all survived. So when he bought Knocknagow, we had such fun. I remember for years, well, it seemed like years, being out in Crosstown on the Cats Strand with the barge on the beach over there, and planks going across, and just walking across the plank to get onto the barge as Dad was welding. And so obviously I learned from that, like, he just persevered. He wasn't a fast job, but he just persevered at it and stayed going until they had it done. I remember one time Catherine walking across the plank, and I was holding her hand and she fell off, and I was holding her, and Dad had to go over and rescue her. So when he rescued her, she turned around and says, "He pushed me off the plank." So he was always a great man for friends. He made great friends with everything he did, from the IFA to working with the barge. You had Marty Roach and Ollie Sims and Eugene helping him with the barge all the time. And Eugene is remained a stalwart friend, and still is. Fortunately, Marty and Ollie aren't here anymore. We also made great friends with the orchestra that himself and Mom and Geraldine and Alan put together. Mom and Geraldine were in the kitchen saying, "I'd love to have someone to play, but we both can play these instruments and we've no one to play them. It's not fair." And Dad said, "Right, here's the concert date. Get it together." And I went and booked the venue and for a date. So it just goes to show that if you put pressure on people, they can do amazing things. So anyway, that's all I have to say. And just that I can still think it's happening like that.
So Aideen and myself are going to play a song by Schubert and called Andy Music, which Ruth and I often play together, and it's a celebration of how music can help us through difficult times and bring joy and enrich our lives. And although Richard wasn't a musician, and like long far from it, he just created and enabled music making all around him for his whole life through Wexford Symphonia, the Light Opera Society, and even reconstructing the whole pipe organ for Ruth. So here's To Music by Schubert.
my name is Belinda. I am Richard's niece. My father, Buddy, and he were very close. And I'm wanting to speak on behalf of the wider family in a lot of ways today. Richard was my second father. He and my father, as Keith said, were very close. They spent a lot of time farming together really successfully. Heather, Keith and Catherine, you are my brothers and sisters as well, because I didn't have anyone else, and we spent absolutely all our time together. And we were, as a family, we were pretty inseparable. So inseparable, in fact, that between Newtown and Shortlestown there was a private telephone, one line, two houses, and we'd ring each other up and say, what are you doing, or what are you doing, and can you do this for me? So it was pretty much inseparable. We also really enjoyed ourselves as children with Richard and Bud. Keith's already mentioned getting into the transit van. I can still remember getting in the transit van, coming up to look at the cattle, going to Goodwin's for their milk, and all of that. And it was just the sort of thing that you had to be back for 11 o'clock in Shortlestown, because our grandmother, Margaret, was an amazing cook, and all she wanted to do was feed us all. And she would cook something and bake something almost every day. I think our favourite was the very flat golden syrup flat cakes, which I don't think any of us actually have the recipe for, unfortunately, or can do it properly. This was the 70s, and so it felt like sort of life was idyllic now when you look back on it. I'm sure everyone looks back on their lives in that way, but it was wonderful. Harvest time was particularly special. Richard and my dad would work to their best strengths. Dad would sit on the combine all day, and Richard would hold the grain backwards and forwards. And to my absolute jealousy, Heather and Keith were allowed to stand on the footplate as Richard tipped the grain out and into the sheds. I mean, they'd hung on, and sometimes I think Keith's feet fell off. They were just hanging on. So as Yvonne said, health and safety just didn't come into it at all. It was just incredible. And then around 4 o'clock, again, it was time for the family to regather on the stubble. I'm sure we didn't do this every day, but it just felt like as children during the harvest, we'd sit in the stubble with our picnics. Everyone would stop, Richard and my dad, and everyone would come together and just sit and just for a few minutes have cake and a tea, catch up, find out what's going on, and then they'd go back to work, and sometimes they wouldn't be home till 11 o'clock at night. So that just shows, you know, how important it was for us at that time. So there's so many more memories that I could share with you of growing up with Richard. The knocking at Gow's been mentioned. I also remember him constantly driving to far-flung places to pick something up. Eugene usually with him, or he'd just pick one of us up and say, I'm off to so-and-so, do you want to come with us? And we would just spend the day going up to him, out with him. He'd also be the main person that would bring us to and from school up in Dublin, because my parents hated driving, so Richard would be no problem. He would just come up and pick us up from school or drop us off at school. So as we say goodbye to Richard, many of our memories in recent times and your memories will be of the care that Richard and Ruth got, and Catherine have done that absolutely eloquently about what that meant. But we want to remember Richard, that he was a carer as well. He cared for other people. I remember him and my father helping my grandmother as she needed personal care as well. So he did that, and then he cared for his family, his close and very, very close family. His wife, his children, his grandchildren, their partners, his son-in-laws. He absolutely loved, and daughter-in-law, of course, and absolutely loved and Taj, and wanting to care for them and do everything that they wanted. So I think it's on behalf of the extended family, I want to say to you, the family, well done. You did amazingly. You really looked after him so well, and he would have absolutely loved you even more for that. So I wanted to finish with a well-known poem that I feel he would be saying to you, the family. Do not stand on my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glint on snow. I am the sun on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circle flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry, I am not there. I did not die. Thank you all so much.
I'm Eugene. The friendship that Richard and I had started 50 odd years ago, and it came about because of a boat. Richard had only bought Knocknagow from Roadstone, and himself and Tom Anderson and Keith towed the barge down the river and tied it up beside Joe Tyrrell's boatyard in Crosstown. His plan was to cut the boat in two, take 6 feet out of the middle, so it would fit into the locks on the Barrow and Shannon. He was preparing for that, doing some welding, and me being a bit nosy, came along and said, "Is that welding really difficult?" And to Richard, well, nothing was really difficult, because the impossible took a little bit longer sometimes. So he said, "I'll show you how it's done." So after a wee while of his perseverance and much exasperation, I did get the hang of it. The boat was duly cut in two, the 6 feet taken out, and we welded it back together. And over the next few years, we helped fitted it out, and I was involved in helping. And Richard and I started to help each other. Richard did so much good for others. And there's 2 little stories that I'm just going to relate to. And one is, one Saturday, he rang me and said, "Will you come and collect the van this evening and bring it to town? And meet me in Peter Square in the morning before 7. I said, "Yeah, not a bother," as we would have done loads of these funny things, because I could bring a tractor and a front loader in. So, sure enough, met him there, 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and he gets out of the tractor and he says, "See that second floor window up there?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "There's a piano inside that. You and I are going to take out." I said, "I'm serious." So, we go in, he takes out the window, he comes back with the tractor, the front loader and a pallet and a piece of ply, and he slides the ply off of the pallet up again the window, and then the two of us go there and we push the piano out the window onto the pallet. Health and safety, absolutely, all in and down the piano came from a second floor, down to be put in the back of the van. And there was 4 souls going to church that morning and coming from church, and they thought they had stayed out a little too late. One other story that involves the piano as well. Sister Mary was the music teacher in the Rether Convent, and she got the present of a very posh grand piano. It was in the ground floor room, but she wanted it upstairs. So Richard said, one evening to me, he said, "We've a job to do." So off we went with Ollie Sinnott and myself. We arrived anyway, and Sister Mary was sitting there or close to her piano with a big smile on her face, with so much pride in this piano. So he said, now he said, "What we're going to do," he said, I'll lift up the end of the piano, he said, "and you start to screw the leg off." And poor Sister Mary, the blood drained out of her. The idea of these fellas going to do this with her piano. And Richard just calmly said, "Mary," he says, "you go make the tea." Which we duly did. And that evening, for the first time in my life,
we had tea served on a silver tray with china cups and all the grandeur of a convent. And when Symphonia came along, we were stage builders, we were transport, we were General's dog's body, and we had a wonderful time. And we would be known also for our odd trip to France and return with an odd bottle of wine. Just to finish, I want to say thank you, Richard, for being my friend for 50 years. You leave the world in a better place for all of us who had a pleasure of knowing you. Thank you.
If anybody here has been into the music room in Newtown, you will have seen the very impressive pipe organ, which is such an unusual thing to have in your home. And I had been asking Ruth about it, and she sent me this email detailing the whole story a few years back. So we thought it might be nice today to read Ruth's own words, telling a tale that really encapsulates Richard's ability to make absolutely anything work. So here's what she wrote. Just thought I would give you a brief history of the organ. About 50 years ago, I was asked to play the organ for a wedding in Tumon. When I arrived early for the occasion, I found that I actually had to play a harmonium. I had been used to playing lots of harmoniums, so that wasn't a problem, but propped up in a corner was a very dilapidated pipe organ. It was a Telford and Telford Dublin organ, probably built somewhere between 1830 and 1850. The pedal board had been removed and was nowhere to be seen, and all the ivories had gone off the keys. Apparently no one in the parish ever remembered it being played. I told them that it was such a shame to allow it to rot in the corner and that they should either sell it or have it professionally restored, but nothing happened. 3 years later, I got a phone call to say that builders were working in the church. They were about to break up the organ there and then, and did I want it? I consulted Richard, who was in bed with the flu. He hauled himself out of his sick bed and drove the van over to Tumon. Already they had started taking the case apart with a block hammer, some of the marks which can still be seen on the wooden case today. He put all of it into the van in a big pile in a terrible hurry and brought it home. There were bits of the very, very dirty organ in all of the rooms of the house. When he recovered from the flu, he started rebuilding it, not knowing anything at all about organs. First of all, he started work on the soundboard, and I can't even begin to explain to you what the soundboard does, but it's very complicated and he had to replace all sorts of little bits with wires that had rusted out, etc. But it worked when everything was put together. The original pedal board had F at one's left foot instead of the modern pedal boards, which now have a C. He made a new pedal board from scratch with a C at the left foot, but had to rearrange parts behind where the pedal had joined up so that the correct notes matched the new pedals. Much too complicated for me to even explain, but it worked perfectly. We got the keyboard ivories off a very old piano and cut them to size to suit the organ. When they wanted to use the organ in church, it had to be pumped by hand in order to put air through the bellows. So obviously Richard wasn't going to pump it for me every time I wanted to play it. So he got a fan from an old Volkswagen Beetle car and an electric motor out of an old washing machine, joined them up and put it together in a wooden box, and lo and behold, the organ worked. The original metal pipes had been tuned in the old-fashioned method by cutting them roughly at the top, so he evened off all of the pipe tops and made metal sliders to tune them. Alan Cutts had lent me a book on how to tune keyboard instruments, and it's such a long time ago since we did it that this may not be correct, but I seem to remember that we had to narrow the fifths and widen the fourths to make the equal increment. We tried over and over again, but every time we got to the last chord it would still be out of tune, but finally we got it right. Forgot to mention that we had to cut a hole in the sitting room ceiling and the bedroom floor above so we could fit the top of the organ into it. And then what happened, but the cat went up into the bedroom and walked across all of the pipe tuning sliders and put them out of tune again. The final thing that Richard did was to make an organ seat for me. When Richard built the organ room upstairs in 1990, he moved the organ upstairs as well and made a few changes to it. I had such fun playing that organ for so many years.
Now anyway, you all should know who I am. But I had the privilege of caring for Richard. Today I'm also speaking on behalf of all of Richard's carers, both past and present. My first introduction to Richard was very much a Richard introduction. He asked me where I came from, and when I mentioned I came from Tecumseh, he wanted to know how long I had lived there. I told him around 16 years at the time. Then he asked if I lived near Tecumseh Lake. I said I did. His next question was, have you got a boat? I said to him, no. He seemed to lose interest in the conversation entirely. Anyone who knew Richard will understand just how much he loved boats. Then when he asked where I lived before I moved to Tecumseh, I said town. He said, so you're now townie then? So for a long time afterwards, I was classed as a townie down there. I asked some of Richard's carers for their memories. There was a few things that everyone agreed on. Richard was witty, intelligent, charming, and blessed with some unforgettable one-liners, often followed by a few colourful F words or two. As the years went by, he seemed to get bolder, and we loved him even more. One carer remembered how much Richard often spoke about his mother to her. The love and compassion he showed when talking about her left a lasting impression. Another remembered his wonderful sense of humour and cheeky grin, and would let us know he was doing fine by just the way he smiled at us. As we became less verbal at the time. Sometimes we'd walk into the room, and he would simply point to his mouth, so we knew exactly what that meant. Richard was looking for food or chocolate. One of our favourite memories was his 90th birthday last year. He was in great form, surrounded by cards, balloons, and bottles of zero wine. Different carers came and went throughout the day, and each of us thought, oh, he deserves a glass or two. He said he is 90 today, until we all got together later that evening and realised he had 10 glasses altogether. When Eugene called, Eugene said, Richard, I heard you had 10 glasses of zero wine today. Richard replied, it was a classic actually. Well, Huge, there was no point in leaving him on the table. In more recent years, when Richard needed assistance with meals, he was perfectly happy with a one-to-one attention, provided you were quick enough putting the food in. But if anyone interrupted, it wouldn't take long for you to hear, yap, 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 will you hurry on? He always let us know exactly where we stood. In fact, when Yvonne asked me recently to describe Richard in one word, I said it depended on which side of the bed we were standing on. If you were in on the inside, the further side away, you were likely to get the big greeted smile. On the other side, you got the look. Only last Sunday morning, when one of the carers came, I have been with him the entire weekend, and Martin came in that morning, Sunday morning, last week, and just said, well, Rich, how are you today? And he got the biggest smile I've seen him given in a long time. So I thought, this is my chance now. I'm going to say, good morning, Richard, how are you? And I got the look. As if to say, go away. Even recently, he was embracing new technology. He had a tablet, which we call it a small television. One morning, I brought Ruth in to have breakfast with him. He always watched David Attenborough. We put on building bridges, building boats, old-time farming, and he was even partial to a bit of Cilla Black. So this morning I thought, what the hell am I going to put on for both of them to be interested in this small television? So I put on a black and white classical movie. As I was preparing the breakfast in the kitchen, I could hear Richard shouting, put it back, put it back. So Ruth lately has this really tight grip, and she was after taking his prized possession of this small television and wouldn't give it back to him. So there was a little bit of tugging going on between them. Richard brought laughter, character and honesty into every room he entered. He was truly one of a kind, and caring for him was a privilege from every one of us. So Richard, from all your care bears, thank you for the memories, the laughs, stories, the occasional look. We promise to continue supporting your beloved white Ruth as long as she needs us. And to Ruth, your family, your children, your grandchildren, Taj and Puss Puss, thank you for always making us feel so welcome and appreciated. Newtown will not be the same without you. It was an honour to know you, an honour to care for you, and you will be deeply missed.
Hi, I'm Marianne. I'm Colin Anderson's wife, and the Anderson family, our family and the Miller families go back a long time, nearly lost it. And in fact, I think it was Colin's mother, Gret, who was friends with Ruth first, before Richard and Colin's dad, Tom, became thick as thieves. Gret and Tom built a retirement home just up the lane, actually, from where Gret and Richard and Ruth live. They built this on a block of land from Richard's farmland, and as I said, they were friends for many, many years. I think it goes way back to the 60s. Richard had a little routine, a nightly habit of coming up to Gret and Tom's place for a supper, and of course, you guessed it, some wine, or 2 glasses maybe. And he would enthrall us with his delightful, fascinating and very witty, funny stories. Sadly, Tom and Greta have passed, and Colin and I are now in the house up the lane from Newtown. And he continued to come up to us, maybe not for supper, but definitely for a glass of wine. And we just were so privileged to hear all these amazing stories. One night, Richard came up to me, came up to the house, and he said he brought with him this amazing piece of paper, and it was his mother's family tree that she had handwritten. And there were a few gaps in it, and it was all about the Seeley family. Margaret was a Seeley, and Richard had said there were a few gaps, and he wanted to fill the gaps and try and go back further. And this happened especially after the sale of Shortallstown House. So that's where he grew up, and I believe that house goes right back to the 1700s. It was very big in the family. So he took on this huge research project, and this entailed many, many trips up to Dublin on the bus, on the train. He'd go to the records office, he'd go to the National Library, and he'd take photocopy after photocopy of all these records, and he brought them back home, and he classified them all in these, you know, those display books, and he had loads of these lovely display books, and it was all organised and classified. I mean, that's a major piece of research. And I think that's probably how he kept himself busy in the long winter nights. You know, he wasn't that much into the TV, was he? So there he was, putting together this. And as well as this, he actually engineered this type of scroll. It was, how do I explain it? It was like a big drum. And on that drum were A3 pages stuck together with the family tree set out in a linear fashion. And he had a crankshaft at the other end of another scroll, and you could wind this and literally go back generations on this family tree scroll. And it was honestly a phenomenal piece of engineering, not to mention organisation and research. Anyway, about 10 years ago, I think he was in his 80s, early 80s, he came up to me and he said, I'm writing my family tree, would you proofread it for me? And would you help me edit it? So anyway, so he would come up, and we'd have quite a few evenings together, or afternoons, and there was the history of Shortallstown and his family, and I learned so much about Richard. He enthralled me with these really very funny tales of his childhood, his travels, the farming life, the Symphonia, his beloved Knocknagown, amazing stories. And as a result, he put together this incredible book, which you might see copies of around the place. You're not having mine. And I wasn't the only one that helped, obviously. I think Ruth initially typed up the original draft. Eugene, I think, helped with, and Alan Mann helped with the typesetting and among other things. And other people obviously had a hand in it. But for me, I loved every minute of it. People thought that it was a chore, but actually no, it was a pleasure. And Richard and I laughed together. We even shed the odd tear together. And later, after he'd made it and published it, and beautiful, beautiful book, given out copies to people, he came to me one day and he thanked me, and he said it had really helped him. And I said, how's that, Richard? He said it helped him come to terms with a few issues, and serious issues that he'd had about things that had happened, and he'd made his peace as a result. And it wasn't really me, I was just really there to edit. And as I said, it was no onerous task, it was a joy. And really thank you, Richard, for letting me be your sounding board. Rest in peace. Thank you.
I'm speaking today on behalf of my dad, Mike, Richard's brother. Dad wanted to share a few memories to capture the man that Richard was. The first story was from when Richard and Ruth joined my mum and dad on their boat at Corel on the French canals. Ruth and Mum were walking along the canal bank between the locks when they startled 3 mallard ducks, who took off in classic formation, but the lead duck hit up overhead power lines. It dropped into the water, landed upside down, and was motionless with its feet in the air. Richard grabbed the boat hook. Dad assumed he was going to put the poor bird out of its misery, but instead, Richard gently lifted it up, turned it the right way over, and let it go. To their amazement, the duck paddled off into the riverbank, seemingly unharmed. That was Richard. Quick thinking, calm, practical. The second story comes from their childhood, when Richard, being the older brother, liked to keep my dad on his toes. One summer, he was fascinated by making bombs and bangers, experimenting with carbide and water. I think we've all heard about the health and safety stuff. Dad had just come back from the hen house, his mother's very precious hen house, when with a handful of eggs, when Richard set one off in a tin. The bang made Dad jump out of his skin, and of course, all of the eggs were dropped. Richard, of course, thought it was hilarious. He always enjoyed a laugh, we've heard that. And the third story has really made me want to reflect on Richard's legacy. Dad is my go-to person, the one I turn to when I need help and advice. But I haven't really considered who his go-to person was when he needed another practical solution or something else. When Dad brought the Morgan three-wheeler back from the UK many years ago, it was Richard who helped him out. When Dad needed a gantry built, and when it needed to come down again, Richard was there, steady, capable, and quietly generous with his time and skill. He didn't just fix things, he supported people. Listening to Dad and hearing all today's wonderful stories, it's clear that Richard was a go-to person for so many. If there was a project to tackle, or something tricky to figure out, Richard was the man you asked. He was endlessly practical, always ready with a plan, never afraid to roll up his sleeves and get stuck in, be it a pig on a spit or launching a boat. When you put such stories together, you see a life not measured in grand gestures, but in everyday acts of kindness, humour, and getting stuff done. A man who stayed calm and showed up when people needed help. May he rest in peace, and may the stories we share keep him close. Hello, I'm Heather.
Heather, the oldest. I used to love, as a child, going down to Shortstown to the farm with Dad on my own to do the cattle. So I'd have to sneak out of the room because Keith would be in the other bed, and if he came, I didn't want to go. So I'd sneak out and I'd get downstairs and be delighted when I could go out and do it all with him. He always allowed us to be part of everything on the farm, and that included stacking straw bales and hay bales, counting the cattle, bedding the cattle, milking the cows when we had them. And he also, as Belinda said, allowed us to ride in the trailers. I remember the silage trailers, because Keith and I used to sit on one at each side when the trailers were full, and we used to sit one at each side, and there was a little handle out the side so you could hang on to something. And Dad would drive us back to the yard, and then he'd tip up the trailer with us still hanging on, and then he'd drive forward so the back door would slam shut with us just still hanging. He really didn't care about health and safety. Dad would have grown up all around horses. His mother and his aunt and other relatives would have hunted, and the horse was also used for farm work, but he didn't like horses. He told me they were dangerous at both ends and uncomfortable in the middle. I always loved horses, and that's been passed on to my daughter, who has really taken it up, and she and her husband are going to see the hearse down the lane with their horses later on. So, sorry, I'm getting all confused here now. 9 years ago, he eventually got his cochlear implant, which was really life-changing for him, as he was so deaf and left out of so many social activities. He got an accessory for his phone so that he could take phone calls coming straight into his cochlear implant. And so we would all ring him to let him practice using this new accessory. So Susanna, my daughter, rang him one day and she said, "Hi Richard, would you like to come to my graduation? I've got 2 spare tickets for you and Ruth." And he said, "Yeah, that'd be lovely. Thank you very much." And then Ruth asked him, "Who was that?" And he said, "I don't know." It was somebody asking us to electric picnic. Anyway, I'm going to read a little poem, but before I do that, I wanted to ask you all to stay for tea and sandwiches afterwards. Thank you. And thank you all for coming as well. So this is the poem of the problem solver. The problem solver thrives on the thrill of the fix. They untangle knots, bridge gaps, and turn roadblocks into stepping stones, all driven by curiosity, patience, and a refusal to give up. Here is a poem dedicated to that persistent analytical spirit. When the gears get stuck and the path is unclear, and the voices of doubt start to whisper in fear, there steps a soul with a steadying grace, who looks at the puzzle and quickens the pace. Not one to back down when the hurdles are tall, they study the pieces, the large and the small. They break down the mountain, they measure the weight, and map out a course that defies stubborn fate. With patience as compass and logic as guide, they look at the truths that the shadows may hide. They brainstorm in silence, they tinker and test, refusing to settle for anything less. For every dark question, they search for a light and turn every failure to gain further sight. The tangle unwinds, the answers appear, because they embraced what was once full of fear. So here's to the thinkers who conquer the grey and find in the chaos a clearing away. The makers of bridges, the fixers of flaws, who write their own triumph by bending the laws.
So to finish us off, me and Jeff are going to do a little song that is sort of fitting for Richard. Even though in more recent years he went between giving out that he couldn't see me when I was singing to Ruth, or telling me to shut up when I was singing to him. I've done a lot of crying, so please feel free to sing along and help out.
Treasure, together we set sail. With no maps to guide us, we steered our own course. We rode out the storms when the winds were getting force. Sat out the doldrums in patience and hope. We built it with care to last the whole trip. Our true destinations not marked on any charts. We're navigating for the shores of the heart. Life is an ocean. Love is a boat in troubled waters that keeps us afloat. When we started
more trouble then.
there a bit. Thanks, Joe.
All right.
Thanks, Keith. All right. See you then. All right.